So I've been hiking all day long and following a river valley up, and I'm finally up in the headwaters, and you can just see these massive peaks in all directions. And my goal is to shoot sunset. The clouds have been rolling through all day, so we'll see if they shape up or not. So I ended up getting some really good light for sunset, and here's the final shot that I took. So in this video, I'm going to show you guys the camera technique, the focus stacking technique, and also some composition techniques that I used to take this image from the raw file out in the field, which looked like this, to the final edit. If you guys want to see all my photo editing videos, I also have a free trial to all my courses, which you can find linked down in the description. Let's get into the shooting technique. So I've been looking around for compositions for a little bit, and I think I found the best one in the area. I tried shooting this water right here, facing over at these peaks, but there was too much middle ground and it was kind of boring. So what I ended up doing is setting up this shot where you have the leading lines of the water will grab your eye and then shoot you right up into those peaks back there. And I'm hoping that color will continue to hold on, or maybe even get any better. But for this shot, it's a little bit more technical. The first thing I need to do is focus at the hyperfocal distance, which is the optimal focal distance for this shot. But since I have something really close to me in the foreground, as well as moving water, I'm probably gonna have to take a second shot to capture the water, and potentially even a third shot that captures that peak. That's one of the only downsides with having your camera really low to the ground, especially when you're shooting vertical. The depth of field is gonna be really long. And you can see my camera is probably like a foot off the ground right here. So let's cover a few of the composition techniques that I was looking for with this specific shot. So anytime when I'm shooting large peaks in the background, I want to have some foreground elements to offset it and show the scale or the size. So the goal here is to lead the eyes from the foreground and get them to move through the scene into the background. So whenever I'm looking at images, I always want to split it up, and I like to just split it up into horizontal thirds. And I want to make sure there's something interesting in each of the thirds. So I have the ice, these leaves, and the water in the bottom third. Then I have this water coming down into the scene, and the snow in the middle third, which kind of fills you in on the kind of scene that I'm in. And then the back third's easy because I have this really good light from sunset and then the mountains. So after I split the scene up into interesting parts so none of it's boring, then I'm looking for leading lines to move the eyes through the scene. So my eyes usually start at the bottom left or bottom right of the scene. So I always want to put something interesting there to grab the eyes that also tells the story about the kind of landscape I'm in. So this is a snowy alpine landscape. So I'd like to have some snow in the foreground and also some alpine bushes. So either way, if your eyes start here, they're going to move along in this leading line right here. Or if they start here, they're going to move up into the scene right here. So anything that can lead your eyes from one part of the scene into the next is great. Next thing I have is this water. So once my eyes hit this water, they're going to start meandering up through this way. Or if they just jump here, they're also going to follow this line of the snow up into the middle ground. So after they get to the middle ground, they're going to see the rest of the scene, which just fills in information about the landscape I'm in. But then the peak is up here and the light. So the eyes are just going to shoot directly up no matter where they're at into this peak. And that keeps the eyes moving all throughout the scene no matter where I start. So first thing I'm going to do is get everything leveled out. I always start at base ISO 64 on this camera. And then the next thing I'm going to do is start at f11. After I have that all set, take the focus box, single point spot focus, and I'm going to put it at the approximate hyperfocal distance. You guys can check out my hyperfocal video. I'll link it below this one. So drop it right there, zoom in at 100%, and focus. After I grab that bat button autofocus, I always like to take the manual focus ring, and while watching the screen really closely, I'll turn it back and forth just to make sure the back button nailed it. Zoom back out. Next thing I need to do is pull up the histogram, and I just want to expose it all the way to the right. And that'll make sure that I capture all these highlights without blowing them out, but also all these dark details in the foreground. So that looks good, and I'm gonna fire off this first shot. So after I take the first shot, which is kind of like my baseline shot, then I can start to work in the shutter speed shot to make this water look silky smooth or add some detail to it. So let's first check this one. And I'm going to check the histograms. They all look good. Check the focal point, nice and sharp. And then I'm going to check the closest thing to me, which is these leaves right down there. And I'm guessing they won't be sharp. And you can see they're starting to drop off focus right about where that rock starts. So that tells me that focusing at hyperfocal, I should be sharp, but since there's something so close to the camera, I have to focus stack for this shot. So let's also take a look at the furthest thing in the shot, which is the peak. That's also not sharp. So first thing I want to do, since I have to take 2 extra shots and focus stack, is I want to make sure the water's sharp, because in this shot at the hyperfocal, the water is sharp. So I want to make sure I get the right shutter speed. So I'm going to take one more at f/16 to give me a little bit longer shutter speed. That looks nice too. All right, cool. So I think that covers me for shutter speed. Now I need to focus 2 more times. One down here on the immediate foreground and one back on the peak. So immediate foreground, all I want to do is bring my single point spot focus box, and I want to put it between where the focus started to drop off, which is this rock, and the bottom of the scene, which is right here. So I'm just going to grab it, put it right there, zoom in at 100, back button autofocus, and then always checking it with the manual focus ring. So I think that looks good there. I'm gonna leave this one at f/11 because these are moving slightly down there in those ferns, and I wanna have a fast enough shutter speed to capture it. So I'll go up to ISO 200 here. That'll give me 1/10 of a second. Now I can fire that one off. I'm hoping I'll be able to do some zoom shots on that peak because all these light rays are kicking up off of it. All right, let's take a look at this one. This is just for the foreground, which is now sharp. And then I always just check the last shot to make sure that overlap's good enough that I can blend these together, and that's sharp as well. So the last thing I need to do now is just move the focus box back to that peak. And I want to look where the focus dropped off last time, which was right here, between the peak. I just need to put the focus box between where it dropped off and that peak. So, right back in there. Back button autofocus. And always checking the manual focus ring. Make sure it's sharp. All right, so now I can take that one as well. So now I have one where the peak's sharp, and I can blend all these together in Photoshop.
The other thing I like to look for when I'm looking at compositions are what are called transitions. A transition can be anything that moves your eyes from one part of the scene to the next. It could be such things as high contrast to low contrast, or dark to light, or diffuse to sharp. Any of these things that are opposite each other are going to keep your eyes interested. If the entire image is too saturated, where everything's saturated, or too bright, where everything's bright, it just doesn't look good. The same with sharpness. If everything's sharp, it's just not going to look good. So I have this sharp detail in the foreground, and then as I move back into the back of the scene, you can see it starts to get less and less sharp back in this diffuse light by the mountain. So that's a transition from sharp to diffuse. I also have these dark to light transitions. So you can see it's light here, and then all surrounding this light is dark, and then it's light again, light again, dark, light, dark. So anytime you can mix the scene up like this, it's going to work great. The same with saturation. I have very high saturation in the green, then it drops to low saturation in the black, higher saturation in these yellows and oranges, low saturation in the white, high saturation in the green, and then low saturation in the rocks, and then high saturation again. So I'm trying to intermix these transitions all throughout the scene to make the image look really good. Let's take a look at the different shots that I took, and I'll show you how to combine them together as well. So the first shots that I took were focused at the hyperfocal right here, and that's going to ensure I have sharp focus from the hyperfocal point halfway back to my camera. You guys can Google Dave Morrow back button focus or Dave Morrow hyperfocal, and I also have a full PDF on this. If you guys want to check it out, you can take it out shooting with you. So this will keep me sharp down to about halfway back to my camera, and since the foreground is so close here, you can see the focus drops off. The hyperfocal will also keep me sharp all the way back to the background. But since the foreground is so close, I'm also going to take some extra shots for shutter speed, for the water here, and for these very close and very far away points. So this was the first shot I took. You can see how the water looks. And then this was the second one at f/16 instead of f/11, and the water's a bit smoother there. Next thing I have is the foreground focus, so I just refocus right down there, and you can see that's super sharp now. And then just to ensure the background was sharp, because I had some good light, I refocus right back here, and that's going to keep that really sharp. This first hyperfocal shot probably would have covered it, but I just wanted to make sure. So the first thing I'm going to do here is edit all of my images in RAW. So I do that in Adobe Camera Raw, and then I'm going to match them so they all look the same as far as the editing goes. I'm just trying to bring all the color and light back that I saw while out shooting in the field. Then I'm going to import these and overlay them into Photoshop here. And then some cameras, depending on your lens, you might see that these shots aren't quite lined up because you're changing the focal point. If you see that happen, just select the top image, hold Shift, and select the bottom image. Once these are all selected, then you can go up here to Edit and Auto Align Layers. Go to Auto, and then make sure these are both turned off, and then hit OK. That will line them all up for you if they're not lined up. Sometimes due to a phenomenon called focus breathing, when you change your focal point slightly, it'll slightly change the actual crop of your image. So that can help you out there. So now that I have all these layered up, I'm just going to blend them together using layer mask. So the first thing I'll do here is just create a white layer mask. And then I'm going to blend through this with a black brush. Just grab my masking brush right here. And I'll make sure that it is black right here. And anywhere that I want this underlying image to show through with the longer water exposure, I'll blend that in. So I kind of like what it's doing a few different places. I like how it looks some down in here, and then I'm just toggling back and forth so I can see what this water looks like. I also like how it looks in this region right here. So I can just grab my brush, and anywhere that I want that underlying image to show, I can just brush through. So I'm at flow 100, opacity 50, and then I'll just start to brush these in where I want that smooth water to show. And then I'm just turning these on and off so I can see what's going on. I like the smooth water right here. And you can always back up if you don't like it. Then I'm just turning it on and off. You can see where this water's kicking up right here. I'm going to add some of that smooth water right in there as well, so it's not as much of a distraction. So anywhere you want the eyes to grab, having this granulated water looks nice. Anywhere you don't want the eyes to look, having the smoother water can look nice. So I'm going to go with the smoother water right in here as well. So I think that looks good. So now I'm just going to group these together. I'll hold Shift, click here, and then I'll hit Command or Control and G. And I'll just call this hyperfocal blend. Now I also have the foreground down here. So you can see if I turn this on and off, you can see where I need to blend the foreground in just for these bushes right here. So once again, I can just turn this on, add a layer mask to it, get my black brush, and I'll go with opacity 100 here because I want to make sure this is nice and sharp. And I'm just blending it in right on that foreground. And then if you need to turn this on and off to see what's going on, do that. So I'm just going to blend it right here, right up to that point. So that looks good as well. Turn it off and on to make sure it all looks sharp. And you can see that focus drops off right in here. So I might want to blend it back out right along this edge so that's sharp right there. So now that looks sharp. This got that covered. So now I can once again hold Shift, select this, Command or Control G. And now I have foreground plus hyperfocal. And then I took this last one just as an insurance shot to make sure my background was sharp. So here's the one captured a hyperfocal. You can see the background's pretty sharp there. And then there's the one that I took refocused back here. So it looks like I didn't really need that one, but if you came into a circumstance where you did, it would just be the exact same process. You would just layer this up, and this won't make a difference here because these are of the exact same sharpness. But then I can go to my black brush and I can just mask it in right there for that background image. So this would just cover up this stack and reveal the background, which is refocused right on that sharp area right here. If you guys want to learn all the techniques that I use to edit my photos to take the image from what you just saw from the focus stacking to the final edit, which is right here, I have a 10-day free trial for all my courses. You can find that link down below in the description. You also get free PDFs of all my camera technique guides that you can download on your phone and take out in the field shooting with you. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe this video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week.